The distant rumble of thunder made Adelaide Lawson's heart skip a beat as she peered anxiously through the small opening in the wagon's canvas cover. She had been on the Oregon Trail for nearly 2 months now, and the journey had already claimed the lives of 3 members of her traveling party. At 22, she never imagined she would be making this treacherous journey alone, but after her parents' passing from typhoid in Independence, she had no choice but to continue westward to her aunt and uncle's homestead in Oregon Territory. The year was 1852, and the promise of a new beginning pushed thousands like Adelaide westward despite the dangers. The wagon train she traveled with consisted of 15 families, all seeking the same dream of prosperity in Oregon's fertile valleys. As the only unmarried woman traveling without family, Adelaide faced constant scrutiny from the other women and unwanted attention from some of the men, but she kept to herself, determined to reach her destination with her dignity intact. Rain began to patter against the canvas as Adelaide secured the opening. Her modest belongings were packed neatly inside, a trunk of clothing, her mother's china teacups wrapped carefully in linens, a small collection of books, and the family Bible. The 2 oxen pulling her wagon trudged forward, their steady pace a small comfort in the increasingly harsh weather. "Miss Lawson, you'd best check your wagon wheel. Thought I saw it wobbling a bit back there," called Mr. Jenkins, the wagon master, as he rode past on his dappled mare. Adelaide nodded, making a mental note to examine it at the next rest. The last thing she needed was a broken wheel in this downpour. The trail had grown muddier with each passing mile, making travel more difficult and dangerous. She was thankful for the knowledge her father had imparted before his passing, how to repair simple wagon issues, how to manage the oxen, and most importantly, how to shoot the rifle that now rested within arm's reach. The skies darkened further as the wagon train continued its slow progress across the plains. Lightning flashed in the distance, illuminating the vast emptiness surrounding them. Adelaide felt a knot of fear forming in her stomach. The storms in this territory were known to be violent and unpredictable. As the day wore on, the rain intensified and the wind picked up, howling through the wagons like a vengeful spirit. By evening, when the train finally circled for the night, Adelaide was soaked to the bone despite the protection of her canvas cover. She climbed down from her seat, her boots sinking into the mud as she went to tend to her oxen. "Need a hand with those beasts, Miss Lawson?" a deep voice called from behind her. Adelaide turned to find Daniel Parker, a cowboy who had joined their train in Independence as a scout and hunter. With his broad shoulders and sun-weathered face, he cut an imposing figure against the stormy sky. At 26, Daniel had already made a name for himself as one of the best trackers in the territory. His piercing blue eyes seemed to notice everything, and right now they were fixed on Adelaide. "I can manage, Mr. Parker, but I thank you for the offer," she replied, trying to keep her voice steady. Something about his presence always made her pulse quicken, though she'd never admit it. Daniel nodded, his expression unreadable beneath the brim of his hat. "Storm's getting worse. Make sure your wagon's secure for the night." He hesitated, then added, "If you need anything, my camp is just over yonder." Adelaide watched him walk away, noting how the other travelers treated him with a mixture of respect and wariness. Daniel kept to himself mostly, appearing only when needed for hunting or scouting. There were whispers that he had a troubled past, something about a feud with a cattle baron back in Texas, but Adelaide paid little attention to gossip. That night, sleep eluded her as the storm raged outside. The wagon rocked with each gust of wind, and rain found its way through small gaps in the canvas, forming puddles on the wooden floor. Adelaide huddled under her quilt, praying for morning to come quickly. Between thunderclaps, she could hear the nervous shuffling of the animals and the occasional shout as someone rushed to secure loose equipment. When dawn finally broke, the storm had passed, but the damage was evident. 2 wagons had suffered broken axles, and one family's supplies had been largely ruined by rainwater. The day would be spent on repairs rather than making progress westward. Adelaide used the opportunity to inspect her own wagon, discovering that the wheel Mr. Jenkins had mentioned indeed needed attention. As she worked on tightening the metal rim, she became aware of someone watching her. "You've done that before," Daniel observed, approaching with 2 steaming cups in his hands. Adelaide straightened, wiping her hands on her apron. "My father taught me. Said a woman heading west should know how to fix her own wagon." Daniel offered her one of the cups. "Coffee's hot. Thought you might need it after last night." Their fingers brushed as she accepted the cup, sending an unexpected warmth up her arm. "Thank you, Mr. Parker." "Daniel," he corrected, a hint of a smile softening his features. "Mr. Parker was my father." Adelaide nodded, taking a careful sip of the strong, bitter coffee. It was a small kindness, but one that meant more to her than he could know. Since joining the wagon train, few had offered her assistance without expecting something in return. "The trail ahead gets rougher," Daniel said, his eyes scanning the horizon. "We'll be hitting the foothills soon, then the mountains beyond. Jenkins is worried about making it before the first snows." Adelaide felt a flutter of anxiety. "Do you think we'll make it?" Daniel studied her face, seeming to weigh his words. "If the weather holds and we don't lose any more time to repairs, yes. But it'll be close." They stood in companionable silence, finishing their coffee as the camp bustled around them. Adelaide found herself oddly comfortable in Daniel's presence, despite his reputation as a man of few words. "Why are you heading to Oregon, Miss Lawson?" he finally asked. "Adelaide," she offered in return. "My aunt and uncle have a farm near Oregon City. After my parents—" She paused, the grief still raw. "They're the only family I have left." Daniel nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Loss has a way of pushing us forward, doesn't it? Making us seek new horizons." Before Adelaide could respond, Mr. Jenkins called for everyone's attention, announcing they would move out in 1 hour. Daniel tipped his hat to her and walked away, leaving Adelaide wondering about the losses that had pushed him to this nomadic life. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of endless travel, with the landscape gradually changing from open plains to rolling hills. Adelaide found herself looking for Daniel each morning, their brief exchanges over coffee becoming a ritual she looked forward to. He never pressed for more information than she was willing to give, and in turn, she respected his privacy. As they approached the Rocky Mountains, the trail narrowed and grew steeper. Wagons had to be carefully navigated around sharp turns and across shallow river crossings. During one particularly difficult stretch, Adelaide's lead ox stumbled, nearly pulling the wagon off the trail. Before she could react, Daniel was there, steadying the animal and guiding it back on path. "Thank you," she breathed, heart racing from the near disaster. "You're doing well," he assured her, "better than most who've traveled this trail." His compliment, delivered with quiet sincerity, stayed with her for days. One evening, as the wagon train made camp in a sheltered valley, Daniel invited Adelaide to join him by his small fire. The invitation raised eyebrows among some of the other travelers, but Adelaide found herself caring less about their opinions as the journey progressed. "My father would have liked you," she said as they shared a simple meal of rabbit stew. "He valued competence above all else." Daniel smiled, the firelight dancing across his face. "And what do you value, Adelaide?" The question caught her off guard. "Honesty," she replied after a moment, "and kindness. I've seen too little of both since leaving Missouri." "The trail has a way of revealing people's true nature," Daniel observed. "Some rise to the challenge, others." He let the thought hang unfinished. "And what about you?" Adelaide asked boldly. "What has the trail revealed about Daniel Parker?" He looked at her then, really looked at her as if seeing past the travel-worn clothes and wind-burned skin to something deeper. That there might be more to life than always moving on. The words hung between them, heavy with implication. Adelaide felt her cheeks warm, and she turned her attention back to her stew. When she glanced up again, Daniel was watching the flames, his expression thoughtful. As October arrived, bringing colder nights and the threat of early snow, the wagon train pushed harder to cross the mountains before winter set in. Adelaide's wagon, older than most in the train, began to show signs of strain. The canvas cover tore during a windstorm, and though she patched it as best she could, it leaked whenever it rained. Daniel, noticing her struggles, began to ride closer to her wagon each day. He never made a show of watching over her, but Adelaide knew he was there, ready to assist if needed. His quiet presence became a comfort she hadn't known she was missing. One crisp morning, as fog hung heavy in the mountain pass, the wagon ahead of Adelaide's hit a rock and overturned, blocking the narrow trail. The entire train ground to a halt as men rushed to help the family and right the wagon. Adelaide waited patiently, using the time to check on her oxen and tighten the rope securing her canvas cover. When the way was finally cleared hours later, the wagon master decided they would push on into the evening to make up for lost time. As dusk fell, the train continued its slow progress through the pass, lanterns swinging from the wagons to light the treacherous path. Adelaide was exhausted, struggling to keep her eyes open as her wagon bumped and swayed along the rocky trail. The lantern she had hung from the front of her wagon suddenly went out, plunging her into darkness. As she reached for matches to relight it, her wagon wheel struck a deep rut, jolting her violently. The motion sent her small oil cooking stove crashing to the floor, spilling burning oil onto the dry wooden planks. Flames erupted instantly, catching on a blanket and racing toward the canvas sides. Adelaide screamed, scrambling to stamp out the flames with her boots, but the fire spread too quickly. Smoke filled the enclosed space, choking her as she desperately tried to reach the water barrel secured to the outside of the wagon. The oxen, sensing danger, began to panic, pulling the burning wagon forward at an alarming pace. Coughing and disoriented, Adelaide crawled toward the front opening, but the flames had already engulfed it. The heat was unbearable, the smoke blinding. She could hear shouts from the other travelers, but they seemed distant, unreal. "Adelaide!" Daniel's voice cut through the chaos. "Adelaide, where are you?" "Here," she managed to call, her voice weak from the smoke. Suddenly, there was a ripping sound as Daniel's knife slashed through the canvas side of the wagon. Fresh air rushed in, feeding the flames but giving Adelaide a glimpse of escape. Daniel's face appeared in the opening, illuminated by the fire's glow, his expression a mixture of determination and fear. "Take my hand," he shouted, reaching through the flames. Adelaide lunged forward, feeling the heat singe her hair and clothes as Daniel's strong grip closed around her wrist. With a powerful pull, he ripped the canvas wider and yanked her through the opening, both of them tumbling to the ground as the wagon continued to roll forward, now fully engulfed in flames. Daniel covered Adelaide with his body as burning debris rained down around them. For a moment, they lay there, hearts pounding in unison. The roar of the fire drowning out all other sounds. Then Daniel was pulling her to her feet, dragging her away from the inferno that had once been her home and all her worldly possessions. "Are you hurt?" he demanded, his hands moving over her arms, her face checking for injuries. Adelaide could only shake her head, shock rendering her mute as she watched her wagon roll off the trail and down a steep embankment, the oxen finally breaking free of their harnesses and fleeing into the darkness. "Everything," she whispered, the reality of her loss beginning to sink in. "Everything is gone." Daniel pulled her against his chest, his heartbeat strong and steady beneath her cheek. "Not everything," he murmured into her hair. "You're still here." The wagon train halted for the night, setting up camp around the traumatized pair. The other travelers, moved by Adelaide's plight, offered what they could spare: a blanket here, a spare dress there, food and water and comfort. But it was Daniel who remained by her side, his arm around her shoulders as she stared numbly at the distant glow of her burning wagon. "What will I do now?" she asked when they were alone by his campfire. "My aunt and uncle don't even know I'm coming. I have nothing to offer them, no way to contribute to their household." Daniel was quiet for a long moment. "You could turn back at the next settlement," he suggested, though his tone lacked conviction. "Return east." Adelaide shook her head. "There's nothing for me there. No home, no family." "Then we continue forward," Daniel said simply. "We." Adelaide looked up at him, questioning. Daniel met her gaze steadily. "I won't leave you to face this alone, Adelaide. Whatever comes next, we'll face it together." For the first time since the fire, Adelaide felt a glimmer of hope. "Why would you do that for me?" Daniel's hand found hers in the darkness. "Because in all my years of wandering, I've never met anyone like you, someone who faces each challenge with such quiet strength." He paused, seeming to search for the right words. "I've been running for so long, I forgot what it felt like to want to stay somewhere, with someone." Adelaide's heart thundered in her chest as the meaning of his words sank in. "Daniel, You don't have to say anything," he interrupted gently. "Just know that as long as you want me by your side, that's where I'll be." The wagon train resumed its journey at first light, with Adelaide riding double on Daniel's horse. The other travelers, seeing the way Daniel looked at her protective and tender, exchanged knowing glances but said nothing. In the close-knit community of the trail, such arrangements were not uncommon, especially when disaster struck. In the days that followed, Adelaide discovered a resilience within herself she hadn't known existed. She worked alongside the other women during the day and spent evenings by Daniel's fire, learning more about the quiet cowboy who had saved her life. He spoke of his childhood in Texas, his years driving cattle up from the south, and eventually, the feud that had sent him running northward, a dispute with a powerful rancher that had escalated into violence, leaving Daniel with blood on his hands and a price on his head. "That's why I keep moving," he explained one night, his voice low to avoid being overheard. "Stay in one place too long, word gets around, men come looking." Adelaide listened without judgment, seeing not the gunslinger of rumor, but the honorable man beneath. You were defending yourself, she said simply. Any court would see that. Daniel smiled sadly. Justice works differently for men like Harlan Wilson. He owns judges from Texas to Kansas. But Oregon is beyond his reach, Adelaide pointed out. A new territory, new laws. Daniel studied her face in the firelight. You make me want to believe in fresh starts, Adelaide Lawson. As they approached the final mountain pass before descending into Oregon territory, snow began to fall. The wagon master pushed the train harder, knowing they were racing against time. Adelaide, riding with Daniel now, felt both exhilaration and trepidation as they neared their destination. Her aunt and uncle's farm lay in the Willamette Valley, still several days' journey once they cleared the mountains. What will you do when we reach Oregon City? She asked Daniel as they made camp one night, the snowflakes melting as they hit the ground around their fire. That depends, he replied, his eyes never leaving hers. On what? On whether there's a reason for me to stay. Adelaide's breath caught in her throat. And if I asked you to stay? Daniel moved closer, his hand coming up to cup her cheek. Then wild horses couldn't drag me away. Their first kiss was gentle, a question and an answer all at once. When they parted, Adelaide saw in Daniel's eyes the same wonder she felt that amid loss and hardship they had found each other. The final days of the journey passed in a blur of snow-covered trails and breathtaking vistas as the wagon train descended into the lush valley below. Adelaide's heart soared at the sight of the fertile land, so different from the harsh plains and mountains they had traversed. This could be home, she thought, their home. When they finally reached the settlement near her aunt and uncle's farm, Adelaide was nervous. What would her relatives think of her arriving with nothing but the clothes on her back and a cowboy at her side? Daniel sensed her anxiety and squeezed her hand reassuringly. Whatever happens, we face it together, he reminded her. Her Uncle Thomas's farm was prosperous, with fields of wheat stretching to the horizon and a sturdy two-story house at its center. As Daniel helped Adelaide down from his horse, the front door opened and a middle-aged couple emerged, their faces curious but welcoming. Uncle Thomas, Aunt Martha, Adelaide called tentatively. It's Adelaide, Edward and Mary Lawson's daughter. Recognition dawned on their faces, followed quickly by joy as they rushed forward to embrace her. Adelaide, we received your letter months ago but feared you might not make it before winter, Aunt Martha exclaimed, holding her at arm's length to examine her. But where is your wagon, your belongings? Adelaide explained about the fire, her voice steady despite the still fresh pain of losing her parents' keepsakes. Daniel stood quietly at her side, his presence a comfort as she recounted the harrowing experience. And this is Daniel Parker, she concluded, reaching for his hand. He saved my life. Uncle Thomas extended his hand to Daniel, his expression grateful but questioning. We're in your debt, Mr. Parker. Will you be continuing on your way now that Adelaide is safely delivered? Before Daniel could respond, Adelaide spoke firmly. Daniel and I have developed feelings for each other during the journey. We would like your blessing to court properly. Aunt Martha's eyes widened, and she exchanged a look with her husband. Well, she said after a moment, any man who would risk his life to save our niece deserves a chance to prove himself. You're welcome to stay, Mr. Parker, at least until spring. Daniel's relief was palpable as he shook Thomas's hand again. I'm handy with cattle and horses, sir. I won't be a burden. We can discuss all that later, Aunt Martha declared, ushering them toward the house. Right now, you both look like you could use a hot meal and a proper night's rest." The weeks that followed were a time of healing and new beginnings for Adelaide. Her aunt and uncle, childless themselves, welcomed her as the daughter they never had. Daniel, true to his word, proved invaluable around the farm, his skills with livestock earning Uncle Thomas's respect, and eventually, his friendship. As winter settled over the valley, Adelaide found herself falling deeper in love with Daniel. They stole moments alone together, walks along the frozen creek, quiet conversations by the fire after her aunt and uncle had retired for the night. Daniel spoke of building a life there, perhaps starting his own small ranch on neighboring land that Thomas mentioned was available for claim. "I never thought I'd find peace," he confessed one snowy evening as they sat on the porch, wrapped in blankets against the cold. "Always looking over my shoulder, always ready to run." Adelaide leaned her head on his shoulder. "And now? Now I want to put down roots so deep that nothing could ever tear them up." He turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. "Adelaide Lawson, I know we haven't known each other long in the counting of days, but in the ways that matter in trust and understanding, I feel I've known you all my life." Adelaide's heart swelled as Daniel continued, his voice husky with emotion. "I have nothing to offer you but my hands, my heart, and my word. If you'll have me, I want to build a life with you, right here, where we both can start fresh." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a simple ring, carved from wood. "I made this while waiting for spring, but I can't wait any longer to ask, will you marry me?" Tears filled Adelaide's eyes as she looked at the ring, beautifully crafted despite the humble material. "Yes," she whispered, "1,000 times yes." They were married in the spring, when the valley burst into bloom with wildflowers covering the rolling hills. The ceremony was small, just her aunt and uncle, a few neighbors, and the local minister. But to Adelaide, it was perfect. She wore a dress that Aunt Martha had sewn, carrying a bouquet of fresh-picked blossoms. Daniel, clean-shaven and dressed in new clothes, waited for her at the altar, his eyes never leaving hers as she walked toward him. Their vows were simple but heartfelt, promises to stand by each other through whatever life might bring. As they sealed their commitment with a kiss, Adelaide felt the last pieces of her heart healing, the pain of all she had lost giving way to the joy of all she had found. That summer, Daniel built them a home on the land adjacent to her uncle's farm. It was small but solid, with large windows that let in the golden Oregon sunlight. Adelaide planted a garden, her aunt's lessons in farming proving valuable as she coaxed vegetables and herbs from the rich soil. They acquired livestock, first a milk cow, then a few horses, eventually a small herd of cattle that Daniel managed with skill born of his years on the trail. Word came in late autumn that Harlan Wilson, the Texas rancher who had driven Daniel away, had died in a shootout with a rival. The news lifted a weight from Daniel's shoulders that Adelaide hadn't fully realized he carried. Now they could truly look forward without fear of the past catching up to them. Their first child, a son they named Edward after Adelaide's father, arrived the following spring. As Adelaide held her newborn son, with Daniel's arms encircling them both, she thought of the fire that had taken everything she owned, but had ultimately given her something far more precious, the love of the man beside her. "I used to think losing my wagon was the worst thing that could happen," she murmured as their son slept peacefully between them. "Now I see it was the best." Daniel pressed a kiss to her temple. "How do you figure that?" Adelaide smiled up at him. Because it brought us together. It made me see what truly matters. As years passed, their family and farm grew together. A daughter joined them 2 years after Edward, then another son. Daniel's skill with horses earned him a reputation throughout the valley, and people came from miles around to trade for his stock. Adelaide, with her aunt's guidance, became known for her healing knowledge, using plants from her expanded garden to treat common ailments. On the 5th anniversary of the Wagon fire, Daniel surprised Adelaide with a gift, a small wooden chest, intricately carved with images of their journey west. "Open it," he urged, watching her face anxiously. Inside, Adelaide found a teacup, one of her mother's china pieces that she thought had been lost forever. "How?" she gasped, carefully lifting the delicate cup from its nest of soft cloth. Daniel smiled. "Remember Mrs. Beckett from the wagon train? She wrote to say she'd found it among her things after reaching Oregon City. Must have been given to her during the confusion after the fire, and she only recently realized it wasn't hers." Adelaide traced the gold rim of the cup, tears welling in her eyes. "Just when I think I couldn't love you more, you find new ways to surprise me." Daniel drew her into his arms. "I'd pull you from a burning wagon all over again, Adelaide Parker, every day for the rest of my life, if that's what it took to be with you." As the sun set over their farm, casting long shadows across the fields they had cultivated together, Adelaide knew with absolute certainty that from the ashes of her greatest loss had risen her greatest joy. The wagon had caught fire on the trail. The cowboy had ripped the canvas and pulled her free, and in doing so had given her the most precious gift of all, a love that burned brighter than any flame, illuminating a future neither of them could have imagined alone.